Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Hearing the conversation between her mother-in-law and husband, the pregnant wife was initially paralyzed with shock, then grabbed her belongings and climbed out the window onto the street. Time was of the essence. If you asked Isabella how one should choose a husband, she would say, first, look at his parents, talk to them, and preferably not just once or twice. Ask questions. Behave naturally and don't try to present the best version of yourself. The mother-in-law will see through you anyway. And when you confirm that the groom's parents are indeed monsters, run as far and fast as you can. Forget that you love the guy, rip him out of your heart, and then maybe everything will be all right. Unfortunately, no one had given Isabella such advice in her time. And even if someone had, it's doubtful she would have listened. Isabella loved Conrado too much to heed bad omens, and in her youth, believed she could handle any difficulty. Sorry I'm late. Have you been waiting long? Isabella greeted Conrado with a smile. Just 5 minutes. No need to rush. We're still on time. Conrado looked disheveled and sweaty. Apparently, he had run the entire way to the bus stop. Isabella smoothed his hair and straightened his collar, making his cheeks turn even redder, and nodded, There, that's better. Look, there's our bus. You're just in time. To spare Conrado's feelings, Isabella didn't mention that a bus with the same number had passed by the stop 10 minutes earlier and that she had been waiting here for about half an hour. The boy had enough problems at home and at the university, no need to nag him with her criticisms. They sat by the window, and Conrado immediately buried his nose in a textbook. However, Isabella saw that his thoughts were wandering. For a long time, he didn't turn a single page. Deciding it couldn't get worse, the girl cautiously asked, Is something wrong? What? Conrado started and nearly dropped the book. Oh, no. I mean, yes, something happened, but not to me, to my mom. Her test results came back bad. Isabella had expected such an answer. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened. And what do the doctors say? Nothing, Conrado replied, with unexpected bitterness. They say nothing because it's impossible to get an appointment, no slots available for a month, half the doctors are out sick themselves. Isabella gently touched his hand. Everything will be all right, I'm sure of it. Conrado immediately lost all his fight and sighed, I hope so. Sorry for snapping, just a lot has piled up lately. He didn't need to say it, Isabella could see for herself. Conrado was a transfer student, having come from another city. Like any newcomer, he had his challenges, especially with his aptitude for technical subjects. In short, for someone who chose to be an engineer, the situation looked grim. Isabella was a straight-A student and a favorite among all the professors, seemingly having met her opposite. If there was a task she was praised for, Conrado was surely scolded for his submission. Lately, the girl had stopped loving difficult tasks. Before, she felt triumphant pride after completing them. Now, that pride was mixed with a considerable dose of guilt, as if she somehow contributed to Conrado being scolded. Isabella couldn't influence Conrado's mother's health, but she hoped she could still do something about his exam results. Do you want to rehearse a little? She asked. Rehearse what? Conrado was confused. The exam. I'll act as the professor and ask you questions, and you try to answer them. Judging by Conrado's facial expression, he was not thrilled by the idea, but he didn't protest. All right, let's try. Isabella thought for a moment, trying to choose an easier question, and snapped her fingers. Well, for example, applied force can be of 2 types. Can you name them? Conrado turned pale, then blushed again. Focus, Isabella whispered, hoping it didn't sound too much like a hint. Conrado looked at her intently. It seemed he got the hint. Concentrated, he asked. Exactly. And the second type? Conrado closed his eyes and shook his head. Sorry, everything's jumbled in my head. I can't remember. Distributed. Dispersed, Isabella corrected him. She couldn't hide her disappointment, and Conrado was visibly disheartened. "Sorry, I just can't pull myself together. I didn't sleep half the night." "Because of your mom?" "Not just that. First, I studied, read this textbook cover to cover, then I kept thinking about her test results. Actually, I thought about them even while I was trying to read. In short, I spent more time thinking about my mom than about this mechanics exam." "Well, what I'm about to say might sound selfish," Isabella said cautiously. "But try, for just a couple of hours, to push thoughts about your mom out of your head. Worrying won't change anything. You'll only make things worse for yourself and for her. Do you think she'll be happy if you come home with a failing grade?" Conrado opened his mouth, ready to argue, but then closed it without a word. The fear of the exam momentarily pushed all other concerns aside. Isabella wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or worried for him. Either way, Conrado didn't look fully prepared. And the professor teaching theoretical mechanics didn't like him. They weren't late for the exam but arrived at the last moment. The professor was just calling the first group of students into the room. He smiled when he saw Isabella, frowned at the sight of Conrado, and nodded at her. "Serrano, shall we?" Isabella looked at Conrado helplessly. On one hand, she didn't want to leave him alone. On the other, arguing with the professor would only spoil his mood and create more problems for Conrado. "Yes, Santos, I'm coming." She glanced back at Conrado, mouthed sorry, and stepped into the room. "Well, Serrano, pick a question," Santos said. "I'm sure you'll handle any of them, but everyone has to go through the formalities. Think of today's test as a game." Isabella forced a relaxed smile and took a ticket. She wished she could actually treat it as a game. For the first time, she thought that her upcoming success might spell failure for Conrado. If even one student showed that passing theoretical mechanics was easy, Santos wouldn't stop. He'd point at her to everyone and say, "Look, learn how it's done, you slackers." Isabella didn't want Conrado to be labeled a slacker, especially in comparison to her. Still, there was no choice. She couldn't intentionally fail the exam and lose her scholarship. Besides, Santos wouldn't believe a sudden lapse in her memory. It would seem strange if Isabella, who usually excelled at the board, suddenly got confused and spouted nonsense like dispersed load. Isabella thought of Conrado again and sighed. Why was he putting himself through this? He would have made an excellent historian, lawyer, philosopher. What other careers do humanities students pursue? He juggled words as skillfully as Isabella handled numbers. Was this all about his mother again? Conrado had once mentioned that his father was a talented engineer, and his mother wanted him to follow in his footsteps. Isabella smiled sadly. The key word here was talented. What one person excelled at was sheer torment for another. Conrado would have been better off becoming a famous writer than spending his life struggling with blueprints he would never fully grasp. Isabella tried to be modest. She told the professor less than she knew. Still, her performance turned out to be brilliant. Excellent, Serrano, the professor said approvingly as he signed her record book. As always. Isabella stepped out into the hallway, clutching her record book to her chest. Her classmates immediately surrounded her. So, how did it go? Did you pass, Isabella? Isabella nodded reservedly, though she actually felt like crying with relief. The hardest exam was behind her. You always pass, someone said. You've always been Santos' favorite. It wasn't so much the hint that she had gotten her grade unfairly, but Conrado's downtrodden look that upset Isabella. He was not the professor's favorite and didn't expect enthusiastic applause. He'd be lucky to just get out of the auditorium alive. Next, called Santos. Conrado, among other students, headed to the door. At the threshold, Isabella caught his hand. You'll do fine, hear me? Conrado nodded absently. He seemed not even fully aware of what was being discussed. Isabella spent the next 40 minutes in agonizing anticipation, worrying almost more than when she took the exam herself. Max Saws, who disliked her and made no effort to hide it, said spitefully, Don't worry so much about your weakling. You know he's going to fail, as always. Isabella pretended not to hear. How could anyone say such a thing? Everyone around her considered Conrado nearly mentally deficient, but that wasn't true. Send them all to the Faculty of Humanities. Conrado would show them, she thought angrily. When he emerged from the office, Isabella could tell everything from his face. Conrado's cheeks were no longer red or white as paper. Now, his face was greenish, like moldy cheese. He failed, Sauce sang mockingly. Did Santos give you a hard time? Isabella quietly asked, pulling Conrado aside. He shook his head. Nothing special, they just asked me questions. I messed it all up myself, you can officially consider me an idiot. Don't say that, Isabella protested. You're very smart. You just had bad luck, and lack of sleep didn't help. Conrado just brushed her off. Don't comfort me. I know I don't belong here. Perhaps Conrado was right. He really should pursue what he was passionate about. But Isabella couldn't bring herself to blame his mother, whom she didn't even know, so she said in an artificially cheerful voice, well, in any case, everything can be fixed. I'll help you prepare for the retake. Maybe we can forget about this for now. At least for a while. Want to go to the cafeteria? Have some tea? It's Ursula's shift today, and she makes excellent pastries. Conrado shook his head gloomily. Sorry, I'm just not in the mood. Maybe another time, okay? I'm going to head home now, see how my mom is. At that moment, Isabella probably felt resentment toward Conrado's mother for the first time, toward the woman who had completely dominated his will and manipulated her son as she pleased. However, Isabella couldn't fully sort out her feelings then. Looking at Conrado's drooping head and slumped shoulders, she felt only sadness and anger at fate, which had treated him so cruelly. Why do you need that winner? Marcella remarked, applying makeup in front of the mirror. Isabella glared at her friend. Conrado is not a winner. He never complains about anything. Out loud, maybe not, Marcella agreed. But his expression is such that it could sour milk. He's almost never happy, except maybe when he's with you. Otherwise, he's a real Pierrot from the Pinocchio tale, a melancholic in one word. What did you even see in him? Isabella pulled out her phone from her purse and began scrolling through messages. What are you looking for there? Marcella inquired. Isabella handed her the phone and instructed, read. Poetry? Marcella skimmed the message and handed the phone back. Why do I need these? They were sent to me by Conrado. Well, the poems are beautiful, no doubt, love, the moon, and all that. Conrado did well. Probably spent a ton of time finding them on the internet. He didn't find them on the internet, he wrote them himself. He's probably lying. Marcella grabbed the phone again and read the verse anew, grudgingly admitting, well, he's got talent. And you like Conrado because he sends you poems? He doesn't just send poems, he writes them for me, Isabella smiled. There's a big difference. Well, I don't know. It's all very beautiful and romantic, but it's even more important for a guy to earn enough, and you can't get rich off poems these days. You sound like some old woman, Isabella sighed. Is money really the most important thing to you? Not the most important, but life's hard without it. Believe me, I know what I'm talking about. I grew up watching my father who drank for months on end and didn't work, and my mother who worked double shifts to provide for me and my brother. Isabella felt she had never heard anything more gloomy and pessimistic. She was happy with Conrado, felt like a muse to whom poems were dedicated. Talks about money and alcoholism. What was the point? Isabella's life was almost cloudless, and she didn't believe it would ever change. Are you busy tonight? Conrado asked during a long break on an ordinary day in their senior year, as Isabella sat in the library, sifting through books, trying to find material for her term paper. Probably not, if I finish the first section today. My mom would like to meet you. She's inviting you to dinner at our place. These words made all thoughts of the term paper fly out of Isabella's head. A quiet panic settled in her soul. Tonight? I might not be able to, maybe I. Isabella couldn't immediately think of a decent excuse to dodge the invitation and fell silent. Worried about your term paper? But the deadline is still far off. It's not really that. I'm just scared of your mom. Scared? Of my mom? Conrado was surprised. But why? She's the kindest person. She wouldn't say a bad word to you. Isabella didn't know how to explain it all to him. Perhaps a guy simply couldn't understand the anxiety of a girl about to meet her beloved's parents. It was terrifying, plain and simple. It was a basic instinct. Okay, I'll come, Isabella agreed reluctantly. Great, Mom will be very happy. I'll let her know you're coming. To gain some confidence, Isabella sought advice from her friend. Marcella had extensive experience in this area. She had met future mothers-in-law twice, though neither relationship had led to marriage. Marcella didn't take her concerns seriously. I'll tell you how it will be, she said. You'll arrive at their house dressed in your best, like a model student or even more modest. But it won't matter because his parents, especially his mother, will find something to nitpick. No matter the conversation, she will watch and judge you, rate your appearance, the words you use, and latch onto a meaningless phrase just to make you look foolish in front of her son. She'll say you're a klutz who can't even cook properly. Of course, not directly to your face, but through silly jokes, which doesn't make it any better. I can cook, Isabella objected. Believe me, it won't matter. Even if you were a renowned chef with a pile of diplomas and certificates, they'd find something else to criticize. Maybe a wrinkle in your clothes. They'll say you're a slob who can't even iron a blouse properly. Thanks, sighed Isabella, you've really cheered me up, haven't you? I just told you the truth. But remembering everything you've told me about Conrado's mother, I'd advise you not to go to that dinner. Hypochondriacs are such grumblers and nuisances. But you won't listen to me, right? Yes, nodded Isabella. I have to meet Conrado's mother at least once and see what she's like. I can't just go along with fantasies and write someone off without meeting them. Marcella shrugged. Well, maybe you're right. Go once and see for yourself. At least then you'll know what that family is like. The old lady won't kill you, really. Conrado came to pick her up a bit late, just as Isabella had decided that the meeting was canceled and wasn't sure whether to be relieved or disappointed. Hi, said Conrado, slightly out of breath from climbing the stairs, and paused, staring at her. Is something wrong? Isabella worried. No, everything's fine. It's just that you look very beautiful today. More beautiful than usual, I meant to say. Thank you, Isabella blushed. Shall we go? Your mom is probably waiting for us. Conrado was also dressed formally, in a white shirt and trousers, as if he were heading to an exam. Isabella heard the whispers of the grandmothers in the yard as they passed, which embarrassed her even more. Maybe she shouldn't have worn a fancy dress? Jeans would have been less festive, and she would have felt more confident in them. Remind me, what's your mom's name? She asked as the bus dropped them off near Conrado's house. Luisa, but she doesn't like to be called by her name. She prefers to be addressed as Aunt Luisa. I'd feel awkward calling her that. Well, then you'll probably call her that by the end of the evening, Conrado smiled. Mom is very kind, you'll see for yourself soon. Isabella sincerely hoped that would be the case because with every step toward the entrance her anxiety grew. Conrado unlocked the door with his key. The hallway was dimly lit, smelled of dog hair and some heavy perfume, which immediately gave Isabella a headache. Mom, we're here. Conrado called out loudly. A little shaggy dog rushed into the hallway and started barking. Conrado scolded her, Quiet, Berta, it's just us. Berta did not take Conrado's words seriously and continued to eye the guest with great suspicion. Isabella forced herself to smile. What a beautiful little dog. That's Mom's. She's about 10 years old, almost an old lady in dog years. Isabella sincerely hoped that this was not a bad omen and that the other old lady living in this house wouldn't turn out to be as grouchy as the first. Noise from the kitchen, running water, and clinking dishes suggested they hadn't been heard. Conrado nodded to Isabella. "Let's go, you'll meet my mom." Isabella mentally crossed herself and followed Conrado. Berta brought up the rear, cutting off any retreat for the girl. "Mom," Conrado called again. His mother, who was by the stove, finally turned to notice them. Reality slightly surprised Isabella. She had expected someone completely different. From Conrado's numerous stories, she had pictured Luisa as a perpetually sickly, frail old woman, pale and thin as to be blown away by the wind. It was not like that at all. Luisa was indeed very thin, but calling her an old woman didn't seem right. Dressed in a fancy dress with her hair neatly done, she looked more like a school teacher or a businesswoman in a domestic setting, quite pretty, but not particularly kind. Isabella realized this from the first glance. Luisa's gaze was scrutinizing and sharp, just as Marcella had warned. Isabella felt that Luisa was evaluating her, but she couldn't yet tell whether Conrado's mother liked her or not. "Mom, this is Isabella." "Luisa," she introduced herself. Her voice was as cold as her gaze. "Isabella," the girl replied. "It's nice to meet you." She really had to force that response, but politeness demanded it. Luisa nodded. "I'm also glad to meet you. I've heard a lot about you from my son, and I wanted to see if it was all true." Isabella wanted to ask what exactly she had heard, but she refrained. Clearly, Conrado wouldn't speak ill of her. He wasn't the type to badmouth anyone, especially not her. "I've baked a pie and brewed some coffee," Luisa said, nodding towards the table. "I hope you'll like it, Isabella." "Thank you, Luisa. I'm sure it will be wonderful because it looks very appetizing. And please, feel free to call me by my first name, it would be better." Luisa nodded again. The offer to call her Aunt Luisa never came. Perhaps that was a privilege for the chosen few. During the coffee, they barely talked, only occasionally commenting on the taste of the pie and the weather, when the silence became too oppressive. Towards the end, Luisa requested, "Isabella, tell me a bit about yourself. I only know what Conrado tells me, and that doesn't say much, you understand. A young man in love always wears rose-colored glasses. He confuses reality with his fantasies." "I'm not confused, Mom," Conrado protested. "What are you saying?" "Be quiet, Conrado. Let us women talk about our own things, and you go take Berta out for a walk. All right? It's time for her to go outside." Berta showed no desire to go for a walk. She was peacefully dozing under the table, but Conrado didn't dare argue with his mother, cast an apologetic glance at Isabella, grabbed the leash from the console table, and went to the hall. Berta followed him reluctantly. A few minutes later, the door closed, and Isabella realized she was facing the most challenging exam of her life. An exam harder than theoretical mechanics, strength of materials, and drafting combined, because she had the most biased examiner possible. "Tell me," Luisa commanded, pouring herself more coffee. "About what?" "Everything, from the beginning, how you met Conrado, what you have in common." "We met when Conrado transferred to our institute, on his very first day. He was late to the lecture and sat next to me." "Why exactly next to you?" "Well, because I was sitting right by the door, and Conrado didn't want to wander through the whole auditorium drawing unnecessary attention. I think it was just a coincidence." "Probably so," Luisa agreed thoughtfully. "Just a coincidence and nothing more. He told me that you moved to our city because the medical facilities are better and the doctors are more advanced," Isabella said, keeping a smile on her face. "I hope you've been feeling better since moving here. Our air is very clean, and there are lots of forests. I think that alone could help improve health. If the illness is caused by frayed nerves, clean air alone won't cure it," Luisa dryly remarked. "But I am taking care of my health, thank you. What about you? What are your plans for life? Are you planning to move to the capital after graduation, like many do, or will you stay here? I like my city, I'll stay. Maybe I'll get a job at a factory as an engineer or find something else. I like my specialty, I do well in my subjects. I think it's my calling. Luisa's look became even more displeased. Isabella realized she might have made a mistake. Perhaps it wasn't wise to boast about her achievements when Conrado barely passed his courses and getting A-B was nearly a fantasy for him. Maybe it was worth talking about it. Isabella decided to speak up. Conrado also has a talent for literature. He writes very good poetry. Poetry? Luisa made a disdainful grimace. A serious pursuit, no doubt. And how do these writers make a living? Collecting beer cans in their spare time or sticking ads on lampposts? You're being unfair, Luisa, Isabella said softly. I'm sure Conrado could achieve a lot. He will achieve, Luisa declared confidently. Conrado takes after his father, and he always got what he aimed for. It's just that people in this city are mean. The medical care may be good, but the people have no soul. He transfers to a new university, doesn't understand everything right away, and the teachers pounce on him like vultures. But Conrado will show them yet. Isabella didn't dare to correct Luisa and say that she was mistaken. Conrado's father always got what he wanted, and that was the problem. His own was different for everyone. And if for Conrado's father, it was drafting and calculations, for Conrado, it was literature and poetry. Isabella sighed, also reaching for the teapot. It seemed pointless to try to convince Luisa. The final year of the institute somehow unnoticed came to an end. Isabella graduated with honors. Conrado also did respectably, not excellently, of course, but given his academic performance, one should be happy that he managed to pass his state exams at all. Isabella didn't know whom she was happier for, herself or her boyfriend. Congratulations, Marcella said, approaching her at the graduation party. You're the only one among my acquaintances to get 2 diplomas at once. What do you mean? Isabella didn't understand. Well, the fact that Conrado got a diploma is entirely your merit. Admit it? Without your support, he wouldn't have made it. You helped him during the exams, right? Isabella reluctantly nodded. Just a little, I whispered in answer to one question when the department head distracted the secretary. And what does he intend to do next? Where will he go with his diploma? Well, probably to the factory. There was a job posting recently. They're hiring entry-level specialists. Poor factory. Marcella sighed. And poor you. Don't let this poet drag you into his mire. Break it off while it's not too late. We love each other. Isabella replied, as if that could explain anything to Marcella. For her, so pragmatic and self-assured, love and poetry meant nothing, mere terms from a dictionary of tearful teenagers, to which Marcella hadn't considered herself a part since she was 18, if not earlier. It's not love, but habit, and it could end badly. I know from experience. Which experience, Marcella? Are you referring to your father? But Conrado isn't like that. He won't start drinking. He even refused champagne at today's party. He's not used to alcohol. Marcella smiled sadly, as if talking to a naive child. We were all different once, better, more correct, kinder. Do you think I never believed in sweet fairy tales about love? Of course, I did. Until I was about 7. Then life opened my eyes, and thankfully, it happened early, not now. I have fewer reasons to be upset. But you, Isabella, it's high time you grew up and stopped believing in princes, or at least that your Conrado is one of them. Isabella didn't have a chance to reply. Pushing through the dancing crowd, Conrado interrupted their conversation. I could barely find you in this crowd, he smiled, a smile that Isabella's heart melted at. Can I talk to you? Of course. What about? In private, Conrado said, throwing a meaningful glance at Marcella. She rolled her eyes. Fine, I won't interrupt. I'll go have fun while you two read poetry or I don't know what other entertainment there might be. She knows I write poetry? Conrado asked, after Marcella had moved a decent distance away from them. It seemed the thought didn't please him. No, she just blurted it out to say something, Isabella replied, cursing her friend's talkativeness. So what did you want to talk about? I'm listening. Conrado said something, but too softly, deciphering his words amid the clamor of music was impossible. What? Isabella asked. Conrado grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the exit of the cafe. Isabella didn't resist. She indeed felt uncomfortable in the crowd, feeling as though Marcella and everyone else were watching them, expecting some spectacle. The cool air pleasantly chilled her cheeks, which, Isabella suspected, were flushed with agitation. Conrado sighed, turned to her, and almost blurted out, "Marry me." Isabella was silent. Deep down, she had expected something like this, and yet Conrado's proposal still shocked her. Her heart threatened to burst from her chest. Conrado fumbled in his pocket, pulled out a ring box, and held it out to her. "Be my wife," he said more firmly. "What about your mom?" Isabella asked. She didn't know why she blurted out that question. Luisa wasn't with them, but it felt as though the specter of this woman invisibly lingered by their side, watching everything that was happening. Conrado obviously hadn't expected this turn in the conversation and asked with surprise, "What about my mom?" "I think she doesn't like me very much." "But you're not marrying my mom, you're marrying me." "Still, I wouldn't want her to be upset about our wedding." Conrado opened the box and extended it to Isabella. She stared at the ring. The gleam of the gold drew her gaze. Isabella wasn't particularly fond of jewelry, hardly ever wore any, but she wanted this ring. No, that wasn't quite right. She wanted Conrado to slip this ring on her finger. "Mom won't mind," Conrado reassured her. "She likes you. And if you felt otherwise, just know, it seemed that way. Mom often gives that impression to strangers, I don't know why. With her own, she's very kind." "With whom of her own?" Isabella wanted to ask. "With you?" As far as she knew, Conrado and Luisa had no close relatives with whom they maintained relationships. "So, do you agree?" Conrado asked, now sounding uncertain as Isabella's prolonged contemplation seemed to alarm him. Isabella nodded and extended her hand. In that moment, she truly wanted to be his wife, and everything else seemed unimportant. She believed she could handle anything. They celebrated their wedding at the same cafe where their graduation took place. It was affordable, and there weren't so many guests from both sides to require a large banquet hall. "You know what I'd advise you?" Marcella said, watching as her friend twirled in front of the mirror. "Run away from your own wedding, like the heroine in that Julia Roberts movie. Remember? Everything will be fine." Isabella replied, critically examining her eyelashes. She had done her makeup herself to save money and now wondered if that was a mistake. Perhaps she should have hired a professional? What if, against the backdrop of other brides, she looked too plain? "Of course, everything will be fine." Marcella agreed. "Though it seems you're not too sure about that yourself." "I'm just really nervous." "About all this fuss around the wedding?" "About Luisa. I'm afraid of my future mother-in-law." "Silly, right?" "Not at all." Marcella shook her head. "Almost everyone is scared of their mother-in-law because it's rare to find one who's a real sweetheart." "What exactly are you afraid of?" "Well, that we won't get along living in the same house. After all, 2 housekeepers in 1 kitchen." "Yes, you were foolish to agree to move into their apartment." "Why did you do that?" "Well, because it seemed logical. Neither Conrado nor I have our own place yet, and we also don't have money for rent. And Conrado and his mother have a 3-bedroom apartment. It's not like she would move into a small flat with us. And Luisa has health issues. She needs help." Marcella groaned. "I get it. You want to double as their maid and nurse. What do you mean, nurse? Isabella was astonished. Louisa often gets sick, but it's not like she needs to be fed with a spoon. For now. Believe me, it all starts off so innocently, and then the mother-in-law and a weakling husband, like your Conrado, end up sitting on the wife's neck and... Okay, I'll keep quiet, Marcella sighed, noticing the irritation in her friend's eyes. You can't be persuaded anyway. The wedding was modestly celebrated. Isabella grew up in a not-so-wealthy family, without luxuries, so she expected nothing different. Everything went well, properly, and only Louisa's gaze gave her unease. The mother-in-law smiled at the guests, but it seemed forced, and she spent the whole evening watching her son as if she couldn't see enough of him. Isabella involuntarily was glad about this. Somehow, she feared the moment when Louisa would turn her attention to her, as if something truly terrible would then happen. However, initially, life in the new home was quite ordinary, more routine than terrible, if one could put it that way. The hardest part was getting used to the new schedule. Louisa was a woman of few words, not a quarrelsome type, yet still, no one wanted to break the rules she had set in the house. On weekends, they got up no later than 8 and immediately got to work. On Saturdays, they always went to the market for milk and cottage cheese. They didn't own a car, so Conrado and Isabella had to travel across the city by bus. As it turned out, for Conrado, this was a normal routine. He knew the vendors well and understood who had good products and who did not. Mom prefers market products, says there's less chemistry than on store shelves, Conrado explained when Isabella tentatively asked how long his family had this routine. I've been going here since we moved to this city. Used to go with Mom, and now with you. Isabella remembered that before the wedding, she indeed never met Conrado in the mornings. She had attributed it to his preference for sleeping in on weekends, but it turned out to be both simpler and more complicated than that. Then Isabella helped Louisa prepare lunch or, if she was feeling unwell, cooked it herself. Louisa often had health issues. Her blood pressure often fluctuates in the mornings, she told Marcella over the phone. After standing long at the stove, her back hurts, and sometimes her sugar goes up. Her friend responded, but Isabella couldn't make out her words. Where are you right now? Isabella asked. It's very noisy. I'm at a nightclub. Marcella shouted. It's Armando's birthday today. Armando? Who's that? My boyfriend. Isn't your boyfriend's name Diego? I thought just a couple of weeks ago it was Diego. Marcella said something else, but the sound of the music drowned out everything else, and then the call dropped. Isabella wasn't really surprised by her friend's behavior. Marcella had been flighty since their college days, and after moving to the capital, she had really let loose. Deep down, Isabella judged her, though she never said it out loud. And now, she suddenly realized that mixed with her disapproval was another feeling, something like envy. Not of the endless change of boyfriends, Isabella had no thoughts of cheating on her husband, but of the freedom with which Marcella lived. She didn't have to get up early in the morning or go to the market for cottage cheese, nor did she spend her life behind a stove. A few months of living with Louisa had been enough for Isabella to clearly understand she wanted to move out of that apartment. But starting this conversation with her husband turned out to be not so easy. Move? Why? Conrado genuinely didn't understand what she was talking about. We have a huge apartment. Isn't there enough space? It's not about space. But still, it's not our apartment. I don't feel like it's my place, and I don't have the right to change anything. And what would change in a rented apartment? Landlords probably won't be thrilled if we want, for example, to change the wallpaper. There would be even more control. There's a guy in my department. He says that the apartment owner visits them every Sunday to check if something's been damaged. Well, that's a real pleasure. Isabella wanted to respond that Louisa behaved no better, but she refrained. After all, her mother-in-law never scolded her, just disdainfully wrinkled her nose if she found something that, in her opinion, wasn't in its place. Though, that hadn't happened for a long time. A few such incidents were enough for Isabella to train herself to order. Sometimes she felt as if she were in a museum, afraid to touch anything and upset Luisa's mood. Seeing that Isabella was upset, Conrado tried to cheer her up. "One day we'll definitely move, I promise you, but just not yet." "And when will the time come? What needs to change?" "Well, maybe Mom will get better. I'm afraid to leave her alone, anything could happen. And it would be good to get a higher salary. The management doesn't exactly spoil me, you know." Isabella knew this. As she suspected, after getting a job, little had changed in Conrado's life. Just as he had been a mediocre student at the factory, Conrado also wasn't particularly outstanding. They worked in different departments, but through the grapevine, Isabella learned about every project he submitted late and nearly every mistake in his drawings. Her own management praised her. She had been in her department for only 3 months, but the manager had already hinted at a promotion. The same story from their institute days was repeating. Isabella was among the top students, and Conrado was almost written off. Yet she did not realize how serious it was until one evening, about a year after their marriage, Conrado came home completely drunk. "Conrado?" Isabella barely caught him and helped him stay on his feet. She didn't immediately realize what was happening. Conrado, her teetotaler Conrado, who had never touched a drop of alcohol, was drunk as could be. It was easier to believe that he had suddenly fallen ill and was unstable on his feet due to a fever. However, the smell suggested otherwise. It was similar to the odors that emanated from their neighbor, Uncle Paolo, when Isabella met him in the hallway. But with Uncle Paolo, it was clear he was known throughout the courtyard as a drunk, but what had driven Conrado to this was unclear. "Luisa!" Isabella called out. "Help! I can't hold him by myself." Her mother-in-law, with unexpected agility, dashed into the hallway. For a second, she stared at her son with eyes wide in surprise, then began to lament. "Conrado! What is happening? What has happened to you? Why?" Together with Isabella, they helped Conrado to the living room and sat him on the sofa. He looked at his mother and wife with a strangely foggy gaze and crookedly smiled. "They fired me. I'm unemployed now." Luisa gasped and clutched her heart. Isabella asked anxiously, "Are you okay? Should I get you some pills?" Luisa waved her off. If not for that gesture, Isabella might have thought she wasn't heard. "How did this happen, Conrado?" his mother asked in a pitiful tone. "Why?" "Because I made a mistake in the last drawing, and the boss didn't notice it. He didn't see it himself, but he blamed me. Where is the justice, Mom? You need to speak with higher management," Luisa declared firmly. "I'm sure they will sort everything out. How arbitrary it is to blame others for one's own mistakes." Isabella wanted to say, but it was Conrado's mistake, but she refrained from doing so, not wishing to hurt her husband further. He stubbornly avoided her gaze, looking anywhere but at his wife, as if ashamed. "You shouldn't have drunk," Isabella said quietly. "It won't change anything." "Why are you picking on him?" the mother-in-law flared up. "Can't you see the state Conrado is in? Better help him take off his shoes, and let's get him to bed. He needs to sleep, and then we can figure out what to do next." Isabella was surprised by Luisa's rebuke but didn't dare to object. Together, they somehow managed to get Conrado to the bedroom and laid him in bed. He almost immediately began to snore. Luisa covered her son with a blanket and stood for a while, looking at him with pity. "Conrado always has such bad luck. And why does he deserve this? Such a kind, good boy." Isabella was surprised to find that she disagreed with her mother-in-law. When Conrado talked about his firing, he had such a strange look, as if something inside him had broken. How quickly he had shifted the blame to the management. Her former kind Conrado would never have done that, which meant something had changed. Isabella had a bad feeling about this. Looking back at that day later, she realized that was when their marital life started to decline, although they didn't notice it right away. No matter how much Louisa urged her son, he refused to talk to the management. Usually gentle, mild Conrado changed, and in response to all persuasions, he just shook his head. "I won't grovel before anyone," he stubbornly said. "So they can say at work that they took me back out of pity? They can manage without me." "But Conrado, how will we live?" Louisa cautiously asked. "My pension and Isabella's salary won't stretch far. I'll find something. I'll show everyone what I'm worth." Isabella wasn't sure whom her husband intended to prove anything to. Maybe to her and Louisa? His former colleagues didn't care about Conrado's fate. Conrado was unlucky in finding a new job, and by the end of the third week of searching, his resolve was dwindling. "Well, what did they say?" Isabella asked when her husband returned from yet another interview. "They said they'd call back once they've decided on a candidate." "Which means they'll never call. We've been through this before." "Well, you need to be optimistic," noted Louisa, limping to the table. She had lately been openly pretending to be sick, not hiding it from her daughter-in-law. Isabella wondered why she needed to sigh and press her hand to her forehead in front of Conrado when she had been quite lively all day. Did she think it would make Conrado find a job faster? That guilt would drive him to snatch up whatever offer came his way, no matter what. It turned out roughly like that. "Mom, are you feeling unwell?" Conrado looked at her anxiously. Louisa, with a look of martyrdom, shook her head. "No, Conrado, don't worry, it's just my head spinning. My blood pressure has been erratic lately. It's all the nerves." "Because of me? Because I lost my job?" "No, my boy, probably because of the weather. They promised magnetic storms on the radio last night." "Because of me?" Conrado repeated in a faltering voice. Then his expression became resolute. "Well, we won't starve. There's one option. They will definitely take me there." "Where?" Isabella asked anxiously. Judging by the expression on her husband's face, he was considering something dangerous or illegal, or both. "There's a job as a stocker at the grocery store on the corner. I talked to the local guys out of curiosity. They said they would likely hire me." "At a loader? You?" Louisa was so agitated that she even forgot to press her hand to her forehead. "Don't even think about it. With your physique, you'll break your back in no time. You know, Mom, it's even offensive to hear that, as if I'm some frail person. I won't hurt myself there. Maybe I'll even get a bit more toned. Besides, it's not forever. I'll work at the store while looking for something else. Everything will work out, Mom, believe me." Louisa tried to protest, but Conrado wouldn't listen. Then she snapped at Isabella. "Why don't you say something? Do you not care what happens to him?" Isabella looked at Conrado carefully and asked, "You're not going to listen to reason, right? Even if you know it's a bad idea." "It's not a bad idea," Conrado retorted angrily. "It's a very good one. And stop trying to persuade me. Let me make my own decision for once." Isabella had to admit that he was right. All his life, Conrado had lived by his mother's commands. He studied engineering because she wanted it, moved to another city following her, leaving his childhood friends behind, and lived in the same apartment with her, daily witnessing her feigned illnesses and fulfilling every whim. For the first time, Isabella felt hatred towards Louisa. She ruined not only her life, but also her own son's, while managing to remain a saint in everyone's eyes, claiming that Conrado's well-being was her priority. What hypocrisy! In one thing, Isabella agreed with Louisa: the job Conrado chose was not suitable for him. What kind of loader was he if he had never lifted anything heavier than a market bag in his life? Every day Isabella feared getting a call from home hearing that Conrado had injured his back or dropped a heavy box on his foot, or, God knows, there were plenty of dangers for him. It would have been better if Conrado continued aimlessly attending job interviews rather than risking his health. Isabella had no doubt that sooner or later he would find his place, perhaps as a manager in some office or something similar. She no longer hoped that Conrado would remember his calling and return to literature. It seemed those dreams belonged to the past. Conrado had matured, became more sedate, and thought all those plans were foolish, echoing his mother's words without even realizing that he began to speak just like her. That evening Conrado stayed late at work. Isabella and Luisa sat in the kitchen, drinking coffee and remaining silent. The tension between them was almost palpable. Isabella did not want to talk to her mother-in-law, and going to her room to be alone was even more frightening. "What if something has happened to him?" said Luisa, breaking the silence between them. Isabella shook her head, although her mother-in-law had voiced her own thoughts. "No, Conrado sent a message. He wrote that he would be late, but everything is fine." "And why will he be late, did you ask?" "Maybe he's been lying in a hospital for a long time. He needs our help, and we are here drinking coffee." Isabella didn't tell her mother-in-law that she had asked Conrado this question, but he did not respond to the message. His phone had been out of reach for the last hour, and this only fueled Isabella's anxiety. She was on the verge of jumping up to rush to her husband's aid, despite the fact that he had warned of his late return. Just as Isabella decided to act, even if Conrado would be angry for being treated like a child, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Isabella and Luisa rushed there, and Isabella felt a sense of déjà vu. Conrado was trying to take off his shoes, leaning against the wall. He was standing, but clearly very tipsy. Luisa and Isabella, stunned, watched the scene unfold. Conrado finally took off his shoes and waved at them. "Hello, Mom." "Hello, Isabella. I'm home." "Finally," added Isabella, struggling to suppress her urge to yell at him. "Where have you been, Conrado?" Luisa asked with a trembling voice. "Why did you drink again?" "Drink? What are you talking about, Mom? We only had a little. It's Milenio's birthday today. He's turning 40, we celebrated. And you couldn't let us know about this?" "I told Isabella I'd be back late." "Mom, what's the problem?" Without looking at them anymore, Conrado headed to the bathroom. Luisa looked at her daughter-in-law disapprovingly and said, "It's all because of you. Back when it was just Conrado and me, he never allowed himself anything like this." Stunned by the unfairness of her words, Isabella was speechless, and Luisa, shaking her head indignantly, returned to the kitchen. It seemed pointless to say anything to her. Whatever Isabella might say in her defense, it wouldn't change anything. Luisa had found her culprit, and Isabella couldn't shake her conviction no matter how much she might want to. "How are things? The same as usual?" Isabella chose a corner in the cafe, away from prying eyes, and dialed Marcila's number. Talking to someone who lived a carefree and easy life was like a breath of fresh air for her. There was nothing like that at work, and at home with the perpetually gloomy mother-in-law and a husband who came home late, there was only the phone. Isabella regretted that she couldn't meet Marcila in person and give her a real hug. "The same? Are you kidding? Something new every day. I've always dreamed of living like this. Don't you remember?" "I remember," Isabella agreed. "You're doing great." Apparently, her friend heard the melancholy in her voice, so Marcila's tone became serious. "What's going on with you, Isabella? Any problems?" "Nothing serious, just minor family upheavals." "Don't mind me. Tell me, where are you planning to go on vacation? Last time we talked, you were still deciding." "No talking about my vacation until you tell me what's going on." "The mother-in-law acting up?" "Worse. Conrado. What's wrong with him? Teenage rebellion hit late? Decided to show his rebellious spirit?" Isabella sighed and shared everything that had been accumulating in her heart. It felt like she couldn't keep it inside any longer. Isabella wanted to share her burdens, to receive some support, even if it was just a meaningless phrase like "everything will be okay." However, Marcila was too good a friend to resort to such cliches. Comforting someone with empty phrases wasn't her style. "What do you think I should do?" asked Isabella. "Maybe talk to Conrado, Explain how this is all affecting me. You said he's been drinking frequently? Marcella asked. A few times a week with his new friends from work. Where there's a few, there's often more, Marcella sighed. Isabella felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean? My father started the same way. First, a shot with friends in honor of payday, then someone's birthday, Bastille Day, eventually any slightly significant occasion. Drinking became a habit. Believe me, my mother tried talking to him, telling him how upset she was. It made no difference to him, nor to my feelings. Vodka and his drinking buddies became his priority. I can't stand them. But Conrado isn't an alcoholic. Not yet. If he keeps this up, he'll be drunk before long. I've told you many times before, but I'll say it again, run from that family. Nothing good will come of your marriage. It was apparent from the start. Run? But isn't that betrayal? Betrayal of whom? Conrado, who doesn't care about your feelings? Or his mother? Understand, by staying with them, you are betraying yourself. Isabella found herself at a loss for words. How can you articulate feelings when you don't fully understand them yourself? Where are you now? Marcella asked. In the cafe. Remember the one we often went to when we were still students? Close to the main building of our institute. How could I forget? Marcella's voice tinged with nostalgia. I love their chocolate pastries. Order 2, one for you and another in my honor. Will do, Isabella laughed. Aren't you worried I'll turn into a Kalabak with your cravings? That won't happen with your figure. By the way, what are you doing at the cafe? Is this the first step to running away from home? What are you imagining? I just decided to get away for a bit, tired of Luisa always watching me like a hawk. And if she later asks where you've been? I'll say I got held up at work, needed to submit some drawings urgently. Marcella was so surprised that she was at a loss for words for a moment. Wow, my girl has grown up, she finally said. You've always hated lying. As long as I've known you, you've always told the truth, even when it hurt you. I still remember how you agreed to skip class with me in our first year and then honestly told the teacher we went to the movies. I think no one else but you could have done that. Oh, don't remind me, Isabella requested. I was childish then, but now I hope my lie doesn't harm anyone. I just want to relax away from Luisa's company. What's wrong with that? Nothing bad, nothing at all, Marcella agreed. And it'll be even better if you pick up a guy at the cafe while you're at it. Marcella, really, you're being childish. Next, you'll tell me to pick up 2 guys, one for myself and another in your honor. The friends chatted a bit more until Marcella was distracted by her latest suitor. Isabella just shook her head. Her friend was so flighty, yet lived much happier than her. Perhaps Isabella herself didn't need to be so proper, so studious, and so morally strict. No, of course, Isabella wasn't planning on changing partners like gloves, cheating on her husband, or anything of that sort, but breaking the rules in little ways, like now with the pastries, felt very pleasing. Isabella idly stirred her pastry and looked out the window thoughtfully. It was getting dark outside, probably time to head home, but she didn't want to. Someone's gaze pulled her from her reverie. Isabella thought this only happened in books and movies. She felt it all over her skin that she was being watched, and it was thrilling. She turned around and met the eyes of a stranger in a dark sweater sitting across the room. He was about her age, a handsome brunette, and undoubtedly the one who had been staring at her for the last few minutes. Just what she needed. For a moment, Isabella entertained the wild thought that this was all Marcella's doing. What if her friend decided to take charge of her destiny, called some acquaintance, and asked him to show up at the cafe to comfort Isabella? No, that was complete fiction. Even Marcella couldn't concoct such a scheme so quickly, much less find someone available on such short notice. Besides, the stranger's plate was nearly empty, indicating he'd been there for a while. Isabella raised an eyebrow, silently asking, "Is there something wrong?" The stranger stood and approached her table. Isabella? She was taken aback. She expected anything but for this unknown man to call her by name, and so familiarly, as if they were old friends. Do we know each other? She cautiously asked. Not sure yet, the man smiled. But given that I guessed your name right, yes, we do. You went to the third school, right? Isabella nodded, and the man added, from first to fourth grade, did you sit at the front desk? Isabella nodded again, starting to realize what was going on. Did we study together? She asked. Got it. Andre Torres. Maybe you remember? Isabella shook her head sheepishly. Unfortunately, no. We probably didn't talk much. Unfortunately, yes, Andre replied in the same tone. I was always at the back of the class. Probably why we didn't interact much. May I sit at your table? Why? Isabella asked, a bit apprehensively. Andre seemed odd to her, and she didn't quite understand what he wanted. To talk, reminisce about the old days, just chat. Andre's smile was so kind and disarming that Isabella relented. All right, but I'm planning to leave in half an hour, so. I understand. I won't keep you. Andre comically bowed to her like a 19th century gentleman and went to his table for his things. Isabella sighed. Had she done the right thing by inviting him to her table? Although it was just a conversation, could it lead to anything good? Andre sat down in front of her and started a conversation without any embarrassment. So, how have you been? What's life been like for the last, say, 15 years? Well, all sorts, like everyone else, Isabella shrugged. But do you really find it interesting? If it weren't interesting, I wouldn't ask, Andre smiled. I don't like to make idle conversation. And how have you been? Isabella asked in turn. What do you do? It felt a bit strange asking such questions to someone she didn't remember, but politeness demanded it. Andre turned out to be more talkative than she was. After 9th grade, I went to technical school, then moved to the capital. A friend called me over. I didn't like it there. I was earning decently, but it wasn't for me. Traffic, the rat race, skyscrapers. I made some friends there, but I realized I couldn't live there. I returned to my hometown, and now I've started my own business. I earn less than in the capital, but it's enough to live on. What business? Auto service. I've always loved tinkering with cars. Maybe you remember, the teacher scolded me for it. I used to bring almost half of my toy car collection to school and play during class. Andre looked at her attentively, as if it was really important to him that Isabella remembered. Not sure if it was a suggestion or not, but Isabella seemed to recall vague memories. Their strict class teacher, Amalia, shaking a red toy car at someone. Maybe it was Andre. It seems I remember, she slowly nodded. They took away a red car from you. Exactly. It was one of my favorite cars. A gift from my grandfather. Amalia gave it to my parents, and I never managed to get it back. I don't have any thrilling school stories to remember at leisure, Isabella sighed. I regret that I was an honors student. Life passed by rather dull. You call that life, Andre chuckled. We're not old yet. Isabella kept to herself that this was exactly how she had been feeling lately, like an old relic with nothing to look forward to. I see you don't believe my words? Andre noted. You have the same skeptical look Amalia had when I told her I did my homework. How do you remember such trifles? Isabella laughed. Okay, you're right. It's not that I don't believe you. I just think that time for fun has passed. Ahead is only adult, serious life, boring to the bone. Bet it's not so? I wouldn't dare. So, you give up in advance? Isabella knew she was being challenged, but her usual seriousness faltered. All right. How do you plan to prove otherwise? Have you ever played bowling? What? Isabella was surprised by this turn in the conversation. No, never. Never? Andre seemed to think he misheard. Are you kidding? I don't think so. I've always been the perfect student. Remember? I do. Well, that just makes the game more interesting. For you or for me? Isabella asked suspiciously. Do you want to laugh at how awkward I'll be throwing the balls? So, you agreed? Isabella quickly shook her head. What kind of person had fate sent her? She couldn't figure out what words to use with him. I agreed, concluded Andre. That means I'll be waiting for you tomorrow. Where do you live? I can pick you up. I'll come myself, Isabella said hastily. Give me the address. Isabella was horrified at the thought of her mother-in-law and husband watching her leave from the window. She could only imagine the fantasies Louisa would come up with and how eagerly her mother-in-law would share them with her son. I'll come myself, Isabella repeated. She had no intention of keeping her promise. You're not going? Are you serious right now? Marcella's voice rang with indigasabellin. Of course, I'm serious. Would I joke about something like that? So, fate gives you a once-in-a-lifetime chance, a decent man crosses your path, and you're running away? Isabella sighed heavily. Marcella, I hardly even remember him. I barely found him in the school photo. Some kid with bangs. You don't know him at all. Why do you think he's decent? Because an indecent man wouldn't invite you to bowling. He'd ask you to. I don't know, Marcella paused, searching for an example. Anyway, the point is you're not even giving yourself a chance to get to know him. That's it. Marcella, what's the point? I'm married. Only Conrado seems to have forgotten that a long time ago. But I haven't. Isabella stood her ground. Fine, it's your choice. Go home, listen to your mother-in-law grumble, watch another soap opera with her, and remember that you let down a good person. Who? Andre. You told him you'd come, so he'll be waiting. What a noble thing to do. Isabella started to suspect that her friend and Andre were somehow in cahoots. They both seemed to manipulate her however they pleased. Aren't you ashamed? Marcella asked. Ugh, fine. I'll go, but just this once. Remember that. Of course, Marcella sang, clearly not believing her. This time, lying didn't come as easily to Isabella. Maybe because her own intentions didn't seem so harmless. Sitting alone in a cafe was one thing, but accepting an invitation from a stranger to go bowling? That was another matter entirely. It didn't seem like a date, but what else could it be called? Isabella told her mother-in-law once again that she had to stay late at work. She couldn't tell if Louisa believed her excuse or not, but she certainly didn't look pleased. Decided to become the boss, huh? Louisa snapped irritably. It seemed she still couldn't forgive her daughter-in-law for staying at the factory while Conrado had to leave. Fortunately, no further explications were required. Louisa hung up the phone. Isabella called a taxi. She felt a strange nervousness, whether from running late or from facing someone so unpredictable again. Running late? Andre noticed as he waited for her on the steps. Not angrily, but with a playful reproach, as if they were still classmates waiting for each other at the school gate. Sorry, Isabella said. What for? Nothing starts without us. Let's go, the lane is already waiting. He took Isabella by the hand and led her into the building. The resemblance to school days grew stronger. No one had held her hand like this since childhood, except Conrado, but that had been different. Conrado was always shy and hesitant, as if holding a girl's hand was something to be ashamed of. Andre, on the other hand, was natural, like an old friend, as if they hadn't just met yesterday after years of no contact. Isabella put on the funny soft bowling shoes and hesitantly approached the lane. Andre handed her a ball. Here. How's the weight? Feels like I'm lifting a kettlebell, Isabella admitted. I don't think I can do this. Do what? Nothing at all. That's impossible, Andre said seriously. You've already picked up the ball, haven't you? Now get rid of that thing. Imagine that at the end of the lane stands your enemy, the mean janitor who scolds you every morning for your dirty shoes, and throw it. Go on. Isabella was momentarily taken aback by the comparison, but she quickly pulled herself together and threw the ball. As she released it, she pictured her mother-in-law. However, it didn't help much. The ball veered to the side and knocked down just one pin. Andre nodded thoughtfully. It's clear, the janitor doesn't scold you enough, not enough at all. She doesn't scold, she grumbles under her breath and gives me dirty looks, Isabella replied. Let's try again. Show me how to throw the ball properly. She suddenly became eager, surprising even herself. Or maybe it was her usual perfectionism kicking in. To go bowling for the first time in her life and not learn to throw a perfect ball would simply be out of character for her. They played for an entire hour, and by the end of the game, Isabella managed to knock down all the pins at once. In a burst of excitement, she threw her arms around Andre's neck. I did it. I never doubted you. Andre carefully patted her back. Realizing what she had done, Isabella stepped back, feeling embarrassed. Andre, however, carried on in a light-hearted tone. Champagne to celebrate your victory? Coffee would be better. There was a small cafe at the bowling alley where they settled down. Isabella glanced at her watch and sighed. It was almost time to go home, like Cinderella running away from the ball. The time spent playing had flown by so quickly. The thought of returning to her mother-in-law's gloomy apartment was anything but appealing. Andre brought over a plate with a pastry and set it in front of Isabella. A little prize for your victory. Chocolate? How did you know it's my favorite? I didn't guess, I remembered. You always brought cakes to school for your birthdays. Every single year during the 4 years I was in school with you. You remember such details? Isabella was astonished. Do you have a computer in your head or something? Eat up, Andre smirked, before your coffee gets cold. Following his advice, Isabella began eating, still marveling. She could barely remember him, with only a vague image coming to mind. Yet he remembered such little things about her, it was surprising and a bit disconcerting. Tell me about yourself, she asked. Where do you live now? With your parents? The question sounded a bit ambiguous, as if Isabella wanted to find out if he was married. But she decided to ask anyway. And yes, she truly was curious. It seemed strange to imagine a family man spending time with an old classmate he hadn't seen in years, when a wife and kids were waiting at home. Alone. My parents live nearby. I bought an apartment when I moved back here. Why bother them? I don't think you'd be a bother, Isabella said. You'd probably brighten up their lives. You're so cheerful. Andre's smile turned a little wistful, and he shrugged. Cheerful, huh? I don't know, maybe I'm a sad clown who laughs even when he wants to cry. Do you want to cry? Isabella asked, setting down her spoon. Not right now. But keep eating, don't stop. Or did my confession ruin your appetite? No need to console me. I'm fine. I just wanted to say that no one is happy all the time. Then order something for yourself, Isabella urged. I feel awkward sitting here with my pastry while you're drinking plain coffee. They ended up staying longer than Isabella had planned, which made her uneasy. She didn't want Louisa snooping around, wondering where she had been. Well, I should go, Isabella said, slinging her bag over her shoulder. Thanks for a wonderful evening, the treat, and the game. I haven't had this much fun in ages. Me neither, Andre agreed. So, shall we do this again sometime? Or maybe you have other suggestions? We could. Andre, Isabella mustered the courage to interrupt him, I'm married. Andre's smile faltered slightly but didn't disappear entirely. We can meet as friends, he suggested. It had been 2 months since Isabella first ran into Andre. They parted ways at the entrance of the movie theater. Isabella got into a taxi, and the smile vanished from her face. Perhaps she shouldn't have continued meeting with Andre. Returning home became harder each time. The contrast between their time together and what awaited her at home was too stark. Hearing impaired driver, she read on the seat in front of her. The driver focused intently on the road ahead, and Isabella felt as though she were alone in the car. No one would hear her conversation. Maybe this was a sign that she should talk to Marcella. Marcella picked up almost immediately. Oddly enough, Isabella's life had recently become almost more eventful than her carefree friends. "Hey, how was your evening?" Marcella asked. "Where did you go this time? How do you know I went out somewhere?" "Well, if you were sitting at the table with your mother-in-law, I doubt you'd be calling me right now." "We went to the movies," Isabella admitted. "A comedy I've wanted to see for a while finally came out. Going alone felt boring." "That sounds like you're trying to justify yourself." "Girl, I'm all for it. Enjoy yourself to the fullest." "But it's not right. I'm married." "And where's your husband? Eating ravioli with mommy dearest or drinking with the warehouse guys?" "Conrado doesn't drink that often." "Right, 3 times a week isn't much." "This isn't about Conrado, it's about me." "Marcella, this can't go on. I'm married, but I'm going to the movies, bowling, and cafes with another man as friends." "Don't forget the aquarium," Marcella added. "And what, you two haven't even kissed?" "No, I wouldn't allow that." "And your friend hasn't even tried?" Marcella asked slyly. "He tried to kiss my cheek once," Isabella admitted. "Ugh, how boring. But still, it's something, right?" Isabella stayed silent. Marcella cautiously asked, "What are you planning to do about this? I need to end our meetings." "Are you crazy? Give up the only thing that brightens your life? You should be ditching Conrado, not Andre." "Marcella, I'm pregnant. And before you ask, not by Andre. We've only kissed on the cheek, and that's it. Nothing else happened." "Wow," Marcella exhaled. "When did you find out?" "A week ago." "It's very early. Don't yell at me for saying this, but, Isabella, do you even want this baby?" "Of course I do. I need this baby, no matter who the father is. For now, let's end this conversation. I need to think." But thinking wasn't working. Isabella's mind had been a chaotic mess for days. Even the comedy hadn't helped her relax. She no longer felt joy at the miracle of motherhood, she was afraid. What if Andre stopped talking to her when he found out? On the one hand, that would be the right thing to do. On the other hand, giving up these friendly meetings would be so hard. Andre had a way of listening to her like no one else, lifting her spirits with just a word or even his mere presence. Isabella hadn't told him how tough her life was with her husband and mother-in-law, but it seemed like Andre understood everything. He understood but didn't interfere. Maybe he wanted her to make the decision on her own. Isabella stepped out of the car and caught a glimpse of the curtain swaying in the window out of the corner of her eye. Could her mother-in-law have seen her? Isabella scolded herself for being so careless. Usually, when she took a taxi, she asked the driver to drop her off in the neighboring courtyard so Luisa wouldn't notice. But now, feeling so distraught, she had given the wrong address. Surely, she thought, an interrogation was coming about why she was wasting money. In their household, using taxis was strictly avoided. They saved money for more important things. But to Isabella's surprise, there was no interrogation. Luisa glared at her from the kitchen and barked. "Hurry up and help set the table. Conrado just got home. We're having dinner." The clock showed 5 minutes to 9. Conrado, who never worked overtime, should have been home long ago, but apparently he'd stayed late at another drinking session. Isabella looked at her husband with a pang in her heart. Thin, unshaven, jittery, and nervous, he looked nothing like the Conrado she had known in college. Was this the work of vodka, or of his mother's overbearing love, which had sent him down this crooked path? Conrado didn't even glance at her, muttered a vague greeting under his breath, and kept scrolling through the news on his phone. Dinner passed in tense silence, broken only at the end when Louisa asked, "Tired today, Isabella? You work and work, never giving yourself a break." "Got to meet the targets, Louisa," Isabella replied with a strained smile. "There are so many orders coming in." I see. "Well, go rest. I'll clear the table myself. Conrado hasn't finished yet anyway." Isabella looked at her mother-in-law in surprise. Concern for her well-being was entirely out of character for Louisa. Still, Isabella thought it best to comply. She couldn't bear the tension any longer. She went to her room and closed the door. Instantly, she felt a sense of relief. She had a reprieve until morning. Summoning her courage, Isabella had once asked her husband to sleep in a different room if he overindulged in alcohol. To his credit, Conrado had agreed. Maybe he couldn't stand her either, though Isabella couldn't understand why. She herself couldn't stand the smell of alcohol, and now, during her pregnancy, it made her nauseous. What if Louisa tells Conrado about her suspicions? Isabella thought. She must have them by now. Anyone would suspect a daughter-in-law who disappears almost every evening. Especially Louisa. After wrestling with herself for a while, Isabella couldn't resist and slightly opened the door. Her fears were confirmed. Louisa was attempting to whisper, but not very successfully, and Isabella caught every word. "She's cheating on you, that's what." "Who? Isabella?" Conrado scoffed in disbelief. "Come on, Mom. She's so proper it's almost scary sometimes." "I'm telling you, she's cheating," Louisa said, slapping her hand on the table to emphasize her words. "Sylvia saw her just the other day, leaving a cafe with some guy." "What guy? When?" "She's at work all day and comes home later than I do." "Oh, my foolish boy, Conrado. People can say whatever they want. Whether she's really at work or somewhere else isn't proven. And Sylvia has seen this man before. She and her son once went to the auto shop near our house, and this man works there. Sylvia remembered him because he was so polite he even offered her coffee while her son was sorting things out with the staff. A real gentleman, she said. A gentleman? Conrado repeated bitterly. There was a crunch from the kitchen. Conrado had apparently broken something in a fit of emotion. Isabella instinctively stepped back from the door as Louisa continued whispering, her words cutting into Isabella's heart. You need to put her and her lover in their place. They've completely lost their shame. You work, and they. And how exactly am I supposed to put them in their place? Start a fight with him? Isabella understood his hesitation. Conrado had grown broader in the shoulders after working in the warehouse, but he wasn't a fighter. He lacked the skill. How to hit? Where? It was all a mystery to him. Louisa seemed to grasp this as well because she suggested. Call your buddies, Louisa said. How many of you gather in the evenings? 4? 5? Instead of wasting time at the warehouse, go teach that guy a lesson. Make sure he knows what happens when he messes with another man's wife. Mom, wait. Maybe it's just a misunderstanding. I need to talk to Isabella, figure things out. What's there to figure out? Sylvia is a witness. What more do you need? But you're right, you should talk to Isabella, set her straight. I even have some advice for you. Isabella didn't wait to hear what advice Louisa had for her son. She had to run immediately. She knew she couldn't handle Conrado interrogating her like a criminal when she hadn't done anything wrong. But what about Andre? If she didn't warn him, Conrado might actually do something reckless. He had always obeyed his mother's orders, and he likely would now too. It was raining outside, but Isabella didn't dare go to the hallway for her coat or leave the apartment through the front door. She didn't want to imagine what would happen if her mother-in-law and husband caught her. Nothing good, that was for sure. Grabbing a sweater and her bag from a chair, Isabella quietly opened the window and climbed outside. Luckily, they lived on the first floor, and the windows weren't too high off the ground. From that moment, one thought consumed her mind: run as fast as you can. Isabella felt as though Luisa and Conrado would notice her disappearance any second and start chasing her. Fear gave her strength. She ran a full block before realizing she could call a taxi. She gave the driver the address of the only person who could help her, Andre. When she arrived, she looked a mess, disheveled hair, eyes wide with worry. Dialing Andre's number, she asked in a trembling voice, "What's your apartment number?" "Number 50. Why?" "Isabella, where are you right now?" "Outside your building." "I'm buzzing up now." "Hold on." It wasn't until she stepped into his apartment and the door closed behind her that Isabella felt safe. The closed door seemed to shut out any possible pursuit. She collapsed into Andre's arms and began to sob. "What happened?" he asked, alarmed. "Isabella, you're soaking wet. Did something happen at home?" "They want to kill you," was all Isabella could manage to say. "Who?" "Explain it to me properly. Or no, wait, let's go sit down first. I'll get you some coffee." They sat on the couch for a while, Andre holding her like a child. Finally, Isabella pulled herself together and managed to tell him everything. "We probably need to stop seeing each other," she concluded. "I don't want you to get hurt because of me. And I don't want a bunch of drunks dictating my life," Andre countered. "Sorry for being blunt, but based on what you've told me about your husband, I already have a certain opinion of him, and it's not flattering." "Sorry." Isabella nodded sadly. "You're right. Conrado used to be a decent, good guy, but life took a turn, and now he's hit rock bottom. Unfortunately, I couldn't help him. But you helped me. You warned me. Thank you. Sure, after dragging you into this mess in the first place. Don't you understand? I wanted this," Andre said with a smile. "You wanted what?" "To get beaten up? To spend time with you. To be with you. Honestly, I dreamed of this back in grade school, sitting at the back of the class and staring at your braids. But you never noticed me." "I didn't notice," Isabella admitted sadly. "Wait, are you saying you were in love with me in school?" "Not just in school. I love you now," Andre corrected her. Isabella burst into tears again, telling herself it must be the hormones. It wasn't easy to admit she'd become such a crybaby. But on the other hand, she hadn't cried in so long that it felt like a relief. She now believed that somehow, everything would turn out okay. "So what? You've been living with him for several days, and you're only telling me now? What kind of friend are you?" Marcella's voice was a mix of mock offense and joy. Isabella smiled and corrected her. "Living together, but not in the way you think. Andre gave me his room. I need to figure out what to do next." "What's there to figure out?" "Stay with him, simple as that." "But what about the baby?" "I still haven't told Andre. I have no idea how he'll take the news." "Well, I doubt he'll scold you for it." "But he won't be thrilled either," Isabella noted. "Okay, Marcella, I've got to go. Andre will be home from work soon. I'm making dinner." Isabella had taken a few days off work to clear her head, but it wasn't helping. She'd freed herself from the routine of her job only to worry constantly about Andre. What if Conrado and his friends really ambushed him? They were capable of it. Conrado had called her several times, but she hadn't answered. Then he went quiet. But that didn't mean he'd stop causing trouble. Luisa would push him to seek revenge, which meant Isabella needed to be ready for anything. The clock hands were nearing 8. Andre should have been back by now. Isabella's hands were trembling as she turned off the stove. Forget the meatballs, she couldn't focus on cooking. "Come on, pick up. Pick up," she whispered, dialing Andre's number. A mechanical voice informed her that he was out of range. Isabella's heart started pounding faster. Unable to stay still any longer, she rushed to the door. Andre's auto shop was nearby, so Isabella decided to go there on foot. She walked quickly, almost breaking into a run, until she saw a familiar silhouette ahead and let out a sob. Andre? He saw her and began running toward her as well, though it was clear that every step was painful. He was favoring his right leg. "What did they do to you?" Isabella asked, reaching him and gently touching a bruise on his cheekbone. "Was it Conrado? Did he attack you?" "Well, attack might be putting it strongly. But yes, a small group came by to have a chat." To Isabella's surprise, Andre was smiling. "What's so funny?" "The fact that they could barely stay on their feet. Though there was one big guy, he managed to land a hit." "So how did it all end?" "Tell me everything." "Well, if we're starting from the beginning, your husband and his buddies showed up at my shop, yelling all kinds of insults at me. So my coworkers and I went out to talk to them. And, well, you can see the result," Andre said, gesturing to his face. "Though I'll tell you, that group didn't look any better when they left. But don't worry, your husband is alive." "What if they come back?" "They won't. We had a talk, and he understood. It's over between you two." Isabella was surprised to realize she didn't feel much about that revelation. When she got married, she'd been happy. Now, as she prepared for a divorce, all she felt was overwhelming exhaustion. No other emotions, as if none of it mattered anymore. "It's all good, don't worry." Andre tried to comfort her. "I'm here, alive and well. It's over." "Not quite," Isabella said, shaking her head. "Andre, I owe you an apology. I need to confess something. I should have told you a long time ago, but I was scared. The thing is, I'm pregnant." It seemed Andre was momentarily lost for words. Isabella lowered her head and said timidly, "I'm sorry. It's like I deceived you. I'll pack my things and leave your apartment." "Don't go," Andre said softly. "You know, back in school, I never worked up the courage to talk to you, and I've regretted it ever since. I don't want to lose you a second time." "But what about my child?" "No more my or your child. It's ours. Agreed?" Isabella looked at him for a long moment, and then tears began streaming down her cheeks. She probably really was a crybaby. But Isabella didn't care, because now she was crying from happiness, and there was nothing shameful about that.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.